Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's time for our Friday Week in Review. Among our topics, 3 sitting lawmakers are charged in connection with a fraudulent Republican voter guide. A new law increases penalties for mandatory reporters who don't report suspected child abuse. A grand jury is digging into Douglas Anderson's history of sexual misconduct by teachers, even as the school district finds leaders knowingly failed to report abuse allegations. And a deal between the city and European Street ensures that the planned Riverfront Plaza restaurant is locally owned. To talk about all that and more, I'm joined by Frank Powers, former assignment manager at News4JAX, local legend. Frank Powers.
Good morning. I parked in spot number 100, which is what we might hit today.
Oh, yeah.
Gosh. If we're lucky.
Yeah. Feels like it's going to be, you're going to have to find a higher parking space.
4th straight heat advisory.
We're also joined by Megan Malicote, education reporter at Jacksonville Today. Good morning, Megan.
Good morning.
John Daigle, political consultant, former reporter. John Daigle, favorite of the program. How are you?
Thanks. Well, thanks for the invite, Ann.
Glad to have you. And we are joined by Noah Hurt, St. Johns County reporter for Jacksonville Today. Hi, Noah.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Busy week for you.
Busy week.
Yeah, it has been a busy week for you, Noah. And this has to do with this fake voter guide scheme that has really shaken the Republican Party on the First Coast. 3 sitting St. Johns County lawmakers criminally charged in relation to a fake voter guide. This actually dates to the 2024 election. Tell us, who are the elected officials that are implicated in this scam, and what are they accused of doing?
Yep. So the elected officials who are implicated here are St. Johns County Commissioners Christian Whitehurst and Sarah Arnold, both of whom are current sitting St. Johns County Commissioners, as well as the former mayor and current city commissioner in St. Augustine Beach, Dylan Rumrell. They are accused of having participated in this scheme from 2024. Anybody who lives in St. John's now and was here for the 2024 election probably remembers there was a lot of hinky stuff going on in that election. I think that's fair to say. There were a lot of mailers that were going out accusing people of being this and people of being this. And, you know, every day there was a new mailer coming out that was, this person's a socialist. Well, this person's not a real MAGA Republican, and these kinds of things, accusing one another of things. But the one that really shook up the local Republican Party was this fake voter guide that came out. The local Republican Party in St. John's endorsed a slate of candidates, which when they did that, I wrote about it because it was a relatively big deal. They chose to not endorse any of the incumbents on the St. John's County Commission and to endorse newcomers in a lot of other races, in part because of this kind of schism in the local Republican Party in terms of where they sit on development, a lot of specifically residential development. As St. Johns County continues to grow, it kind of became this anti-development versus less anti-development wings of the party kind of competing for one another. So anyway, the local Republican Party endorses a slate of candidates. They send out a voter guide to their elected or to their registered voters, and then another voter guide appears in people's mailboxes that has a completely different slate of candidates. It purports itself to be from the local Republican Party. There is no information on it that indicates that it was a campaign ad paid for by any particular campaign, and it includes,
which is required by law. And this slate included folks who were not endorsed by the local Republican Party, including incumbents like Christian Whitehurst and at the time Roy Alamo and folks like that. So, and we should say this, not only did it not have identification, but it looked identical essentially to the authentic Republican Party voter guide.
It caused a lot of confusion locally. And of course, you had people alleging one was fake and the other was not fake. And the local Republican Party had to step in and say, no, this is who we endorsed. And it was never really clear, you know, whether this was some sort of strange pack, whether this was an individual. So 2 years later, it becomes apparent that the FDLE received a number of complaints about this, including from the local Republican Party, and have been investigating. They have charged these 3 sitting politicians as well as a couple other people, including a woman named Brianna Jordan, who was at the time running a political consulting firm called Front Street Consulting, as being implicated in this. Jordan allegedly got together with Christian Whitehurst, Sarah Arnold, and some of these other folks. They got together at a home that Jordan was renting, and they, as the FDLE says, conspired to put together this fake voter guide. They all got together and they put them into these envelopes. They sent them out of places that were not St. Johns County to make it maybe look a little more difficult to track. And Jordan was also charged, and she was arrested this week. She had an extra charge for evidence tampering. And so that had to do with destroying some extra copies and this kind of thing. So she has an additional charge. So all this to say, yes, this has really shaken up local politics in St. John's.
John, how unusual is this? I mean, you have worked in politics for a long time. We all know that in those days and weeks before the primary or before the general election, all kinds of things happen on the advertising and mailer front.
Yeah, I mean, St. Johns County is a very unique political environment, as no one knows probably better than most
That is
people.
an understatement, I think.
I have, over the last 30 years, I've done more than 50 campaigns in Nassau, Duval, Clay, and Alachua County, but I've never worked in a political campaign in St. John's, despite the fact that I've lived down there for 25 years.
By choice?
Not quite. I'll give you an example. So in that 2024 cycle, I wasn't working any campaigns, but I had a corporate client who lived down in St. Johns County, and she was heavily supporting Jim Priestley, who was also one of the candidates that Breonna Jordan was working for.
Yes.
And running for?
He was running against Hardwick for sheriff.
Yes.
And his campaign was kind of going south. It was in a ditch, and there was about 2 months left, and she was really worried about the campaign, where it was going. So she asked me if I would meet with Jim and talk to him. And I didn't want to get involved in the campaign because it was, it was 2 months. It didn't look like he was going to win. But I, as a favor to my client, I agreed to meet with him and give him some pro bono advice, whatever I could. And we were set to have breakfast the next morning, and I was going to sit down with Jim and offer whatever free advice I could give. And late the night before we were supposed to have that breakfast, I get this strange email from my client, my friend, who said, Breonna Jordan says she didn't want any outside consultants involved. That was straight. First, I didn't know who Breonna Jordan was. I mean, I thought I knew every political consultant in Northeast Florida, either having worked with them or against them in some capacity. I didn't know who she was. So I put on my reporter's hat and started doing some research, and I could find almost nothing about this lady.
Yeah.
She had a website that had nothing on it except for a contact form. Her LinkedIn page showed almost nothing. And it was very strange to have a political consultant working in Northeast Florida who you could find out almost nothing about. I thought it was very interesting, but I kind of set it aside, and I never met with Priestley, and again, I've never done any campaigns down there, but Jordan is an interesting figure in this whole thing. I've never met her, don't know much about her. It's very hard to find out information about her, but there's a lot of different angles about this story, but to me, in my mind, she seems to be the pivotal, sort of most interesting part of this whole story.
Well, I mean, one thing that is kind of crazy just from outside eyes, and I'll throw this open to whoever, but I mean, the commissioners that are currently charged with this criminal conspiracy, it's 2 out of 5, so that's 40% of the board. But this political consultant, Breonna Jordan, worked also with the incumbents, Roy Almo, Henry Dean. So out of a 5-member board and it wasn't the same makeup of the board, but she worked with 4 out of 5 commissioners, which seems like an enormous amount of political influence for somebody who is now, charged with a felony for trying to misdirect voters in the Republican primary.
That is strange, especially since right here is a guy who would have been a better hire, I think. When this broke, I know one of the people who was arrested. She used to work with me at Channel 4. And it was just like words came to my audacious, overzealous. Did you honestly think that these 10 to 20,000 fake voter guides were going to be sent out and the Republican Party of St. Johns County wouldn't notice?
Who worked with you at Channel 4?
Jamie Johnson.
Jamie,
Okay.
Who was working for
Breonna
Breonna Jordan
Jordan
at the time.
Okay, and is also charged.
Right. And if you read the charging document, she has cooperated. There was another guy, an intern working for Breonna Jordan, who was granted immunity. So this is all wrapped up. What's going to happen, if everybody is screaming for Arnold and Whitehurst to resign, they don't have to because the charges are misdemeanors. Now, they could get removed by the governor. He has been silent on this so far. He endorsed Arnold, who some months ago announced she wasn't going to seek re-election. Duh, we know why now.
So Sarah Arnold is facing, her seat is up.
Yes.
Christian Whitehurst's seat is up, but he is running. And so
Whitehurst was elected 2 years ago in 2024, so his seat will not be up for re-election for another 2 years.
I see. Okay. So he is not facing re-election in this upcoming primary, but he is on the board. And so there have been calls for resignation.
Yes.
We know that one of their fellow commissioners has basically said this is unacceptable, even if they haven't yet been criminally convicted. This is Commissioner Ann Taylor. She says, this is a quote from her. She says, the mere fact that the state of Florida has officially filed criminal conspiracy charges completely shatters the public trust required to govern. If there is any truth to these allegations for the integrity of St. Johns County, they need to step down immediately. Is she speaking as a politician? Is she speaking as somebody that's just impacted by these very kind of nefarious allegations by her fellow board members?
Well, I mean, she ran a campaign very closely aligned with another candidate who lost to one of Jordan's candidates by 2 points. I mean, Whitehurst beat Anne
Marie Evans.
Yeah. And again, that's a race that was decided by 2 points, and certainly that mailer had an impact. So I'm sure she's
because Christian Whitehurst defeated Anne Marie Evans, and you're saying Ann Taylor is an ally of hers.
They
ran together.
They ran a campaign as the two Anns. They were very close allies when they ran.
Mm-hmm.
And the race that Anne Marie Evans lost was decided by hundreds of votes. It was decided by less than 1,000 votes. So to your point, Frank, about whether the local Republican Party would call this out or not, I don't think that was necessarily the end game. I think the end game was potentially just to spread confusion. There were a lot of things like that in that race, like potential spoiler candidates who didn't do any kind of campaigning, who it seems as if there were just efforts to confuse voters. And that is the charge that Anne Marie Evans is now making. She has issued a statement encouraging people to email the governor and ask him to appoint her to Whitehurst's seat instead. So there have been a lot of calls. And to your point, Ann, about Ann Taylor, I think this is definitely a sore spot for her, considering she was an individual who was targeted by this voter guide. But she is also no friend of Christian Whitehurst and Sarah Arnold. I mean, they're on the board. Yeah. I mean, it would not be that crazy to divide the board into more or less two factions. And that puts Krista Joseph and Ann Taylor against Christian Whitehurst and Sarah Arnold, with Clay Murphy kind of sitting in the middle more or less sometimes.
Megan, I want to bring you in as sort of maybe more of a layperson view, because you do live in St. Johns County. You, there's so many things happening, both on the political front, but just in people's lives and the World Cup. I mean, there's all kinds of distractions. How is this landing for people who live there? Is this just political noise? Is it too inside baseball for people to pay attention to?
I think it depends on the interest of the person, but I personally didn't receive the mailer, but my seat wasn't up for in that election, so maybe that's why. But it's a great example of why you always have to check your sources. But in this case, the mailer really did look legitimate, so you can't blame people for being confused at the time. That was sort of confusing.
The scary part to me about this, I mean, the whole thing is really intriguing and fascinating, but everything with the election that's coming up and everything that people are talking about how AI is changing elections.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these kind of tricks and stuff there's not much new. There's always been fake mailers and false flag mailers and that kind of stuff in all counties around us. But we're coming up into an election, and probably all elections going forward, having to deal with this issue of AI. Now, Florida's one of the states that has almost no laws related to AI in elections. The only law that Florida has related to AI says you have to identify in your disclaimer if you use AI. There's no law.
Only if it's disparaging, right?
No.
It's an attack ad.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I think that it's being used like in some campaigns, AI generated images that aren't necessarily attack ads, but are fake.
You can use AI to do either attack or compliment. You can use it really any way you want, as long as you put in your disclaimer that you used AI, and that's a really low bar. And, I mean, Florida has really weak election laws in general. You think about, other than the evidence tampering crime, which is really a fairly serious third-degree felony. Other than that, the penalties all the people involved in this face are very mild. I mean,
Which are just
misdemeanors and $2,500 fines.
Yeah.
There's not much penalty in Florida for violating campaign laws or campaign finance laws or this kind of stuff. And really, the incentive for doing this is so much stronger than the disincentive that you face if you get caught.
This is a rare case, it seems, anyway, where something is actually leading to charges as opposed to just,
Think about Whitehurst. He won the election by a few hundred votes, probably in large part because of this illegal mailer. He served on the county commission for 2 years without anything. He probably will finish out his term. I think the most he faces is a $2,500 misdemeanor charge, and then he'll probably be reelected. That's not a very big disincentive for doing this kind of stuff.
And we know that the political consultant, Brianna Jordan, is facing felony charges because she allegedly tried to burn or did burn the mailers and the evidence, essentially. So that's the tampering charge. But their next meeting isn't for another week or so.
Mm-hmm.
What are we expecting is going to happen now that we have one commissioner calling for resignations and then these two sitting commissioners that are implicated in this fraud?
I think it would. I expect this is going to be a really interesting meeting on July 21st when they meet next, in part because, I'm not necessarily saying that this is the opinion of everybody who lives in St. John's, but there is a very prominent opinion among people who are regular attendees to the St. John's County Commission meetings, of whom, like I say, that is not necessarily representative of the entire community, but it is definitely a vocal chunk of the community who perceive Sarah Arnold and Christian Whitehurst to be bought and paid for by developer interests. Now, I think given that it was these two individuals who were implicated in this, the folks who are already predisposed to be questionable or to have questions about decisions they're making and to debate maybe the veracity of things they're saying are going to be calling for things. And especially, this is, I would not be surprised if this ends up being a sore spot for Krista Joseph, who was censured for...
She's another commissioner.
She's another commissioner, yes, who folks who live in St. John's, and maybe if you don't, might remember, was censured for, from the dais, encouraging people to elect folks who were running against Christian Whitehurst and the other incumbents in that 2024 race. She ended up, being found all right by a judge throughout all of that, but that was a lengthy lawsuit. Christian Whitehurst himself has kind of, in the last 6 months especially, been pitching himself as kind of this force combating misinformation in the community. He often at the ends of meetings will bring Facebook posts that he says are not telling the entire story and these kinds of things, often by campaign people who are involved with Krista Joseph and such, and put these Facebook posts up and go, this is why you can't trust everything you see on the internet and this kind of thing. So,
I think it's interesting, and I do want to move on in just a minute, but all of this is kind of roiling the Republican Party, which we know that St. Johns County is,
Republicans,
very
cheating
red.
Republicans.
yes,
Well,
yes.
Clutch those pearls.
It is a Republican-led county, but it is dividing. The issue of growth is really what is at the root of this.
Yeah.
Well, it's also, I think, and again, there's also some ties in Florida. There's been for a few years a split between DeSantis Republicans and Trump Republicans, and A.G. Gankarski had an interesting note in a story he wrote about this, where he pointed out that the false slate that came out in St. Johns County was almost identical to the Trump slate during that cycle. Now, that's guilt by association. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but it is interesting that we've had tensions over the past few years, sort of a schism in the Republican Party of Florida. So I think there's some of that at the core of this story, too.
They were willing to take the risk. As John pointed out, it's not much what'll probably happen. They have Hank Cox now as their lawyer.
The three lawmakers.
Yeah, down the road, you'll see them go into pretrial intervention. The charges will be dropped. I've had a couple of people ask me why they put this stuff in the mail. How come no federal charges? Apparently, FDLE felt it would be more expeditious to move ahead with the state charges than get the feds involved.
Well, another question for you, Frank, is, we mentioned that they've been charged. The felony charge for the political consultant, her mugshot has now been splashed over
Yeah, she
all
turned
media.
herself into Nassau County the other day.
Mhm.
Why aren't we seeing mugshots and a sort of traditional arrest of these three
Because the
lawmakers?
St. Johns County Sheriff's Office deactivated their jail website over a year ago.
But have they been processed through a traditional arrest, or have they just been allowed to turn themselves in and not go through that humiliating and time-consuming process?
That would be a question for the sheriff's office.
And they're charged with misdemeanors.
Yeah,
and she's
exactly.
charged with a felony.
So
Yeah.
they might have gotten NTAs, which is a notice
To appear. Okay.
I think an element of this too is that the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office has recused themselves from this entire situation. It was not tried. The charges were not filed through. They were filed through St. Johns County, but they were not filed by a St. Johns County prosecutor. The St. Johns County Sheriff's Office issued a statement and said that, they're too tied up in all of this. They recused themselves. They did not include that in their statement, but I think it is possible that one element of it is that Jim Priester, one of the folks who was running in that election, was running for sheriff against Hardwick and was involved with Breonna Jordan to a degree too. So this is all very tied up locally.
All right. Well, if you're just joining us, we're talking to Frank Powers, Noah Hertz, Megan Malakote, and John Daigle. You can join the conversation. We're talking about the week's headlines. You can reach us on air at 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org. I want to move on now to a topic, a whole other kind of morass here, but it is a series of developments that, Megan, this is something you've been reporting on extensively. And these are stories that have been part of this unspooling scandal that has lasted publicly over several years, secretly over decades. It has to do with what went so wrong at Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. Your reporting was recently recognized with a first place award, we should say, in the investigative journalism category from the Institute for Nonprofit News. So a big congratulations for that.
Thank you.
We'll talk a little bit more about that. But the history of allegations of abuse being ignored is kind of at the root of this. Teachers who were accused and allowed to remain in the classroom. Tell us how we got here.
I think unspooling is a great word to use to describe it, because we have certainly learned more and more and more things. The public part of it goes back to when Jeffrey Clayton, the former vocal department chair, was arrested in 2023 for lewd conduct with a student, and he eventually pled guilty and is now serving a 10-year prison term for that. But when that happened, other students came out with other stories. So that, his case was focused on one student's allegations, but lots of other students came forward, and graduates came forward with allegations about Clayton and about many other teachers at Douglas Anderson over the years. And so the community called for kind of a what happened investigation. The district says that they conducted one. As part of our reporting, we were able to finally get the report. It was only 4 pages long. I would venture to say that our investigation was more thorough. But information still continues to come out. And so one of the things that we found during our reporting was this list of names that a graduate had sent in 2020 to the principal of Douglas Anderson at the time, saying that, here's a list of teachers that if they still work there, you need to fire them because they all harm children. And I'm using a word that's safe for airwaves, but at the time, some of them still worked there.
Several of them
still worked there, and several of them have since been identified as teachers who had harmed children. And so nobody had investigated it at the time when the email was sent in 2020. But it does appear, we've got some new documents in this week that appear that because through our looking for this document in last year, that the district did investigate it, but 5 years after it was received.
So just to be clear on the timeline, 2020, the email goes to the principal of Douglas Anderson and says, look at these 12 teachers. If they're still working there, you're in trouble because they have all harmed children,
right,
using an expletive. And the principal at the time sends it to her kind of boss, her regional superintendent, Scott Schneider. And he basically says, you need to tell this email writer to go to police and to go to DCF, and you've done what you needed.
Right.
So it kind of ends there from the paper trail, at least.
It
Now,
does.
I know that Scott Schneider has says that he did speak to somebody about it, but basically you have somebody reporting 12 names of teachers for another 3 years until Jeffrey Clayton is arrested. All of these teachers that are on the list that are still teaching there remain there, including him. He goes on to molest a student. He's now in prison for 10 years because of that. And this report that you've uncovered shows that the district has essentially blamed Scott Schneider, says that because of his inaction, or action or inaction, that additional students were harmed.
Right. Right. So part of the crux of the Douglas Anderson story, as we've learned it, is that reports were being made along the way to many administrators. There was Jackie Cornelius, the principal for a very long time, who we've shown received lots of reports. There were other reports made at a district level, and nothing happened, and nothing happened, and nothing happened until 2023, when the report from this student actually inadvertently went to Clay County first, and then the investigation happened, and Clayton was arrested. But yes, this email, it was one of many reports of red flags that needed to be investigated that came out 3 years before Jeffrey Clayton. And so, yeah.
Just one quick follow-up. I mean, we're talking about the timeline. The email comes in 2020. Jeffrey Clayton is arrested in 2023. You are asking for this email in early 2025, and that's basically the same time that this most recent investigation into whether Scott Schneider did or didn't handle that complaint correctly begins. Is that only because you're investigating it? I mean, would this have happened otherwise?
It does make you wonder, for sure. I received some emails this week that show that when I was requesting the documents, and because I knew that the letter existed because I had received a tip, and so I was looking for it from the official servers in the district servers, and you can see in this email trail that when I was requesting it, that the records custodian then immediately turned it over to many administrators in the district and pointed it out and said, hey, the media is also asking for this. So at that point, then I think is when you start to see some action looking in to make sure
because
that
they're literally commenting to each other, wow,
yeah,
and looking at this list and the allegations in it and kind of saying, like, has anybody actually investigated the handling of this?
It is a startling letter to read. And the first time I read it, I mean, I think that was probably my internal reaction too, is wow. And I looked and looked and looked and looked for months trying to find what had happened after this email trail ended, because it ends and then there's no other mention of it anywhere. And so I have been able to advance my reporting on that a little bit this week. And so I've talked with Scott Schneider, and Scott Schneider tells me that he took it personally to the professional standards office, in person, through a personal conversation. And so that's why the email trail ends, because he didn't follow up with email, he followed up in person. And he says he was assured that there is a JSO investigation already happening that had been reported, that but
there was no JSO investigation.
No, there's no record of a JSO investigation of that. No. Now they have since investigated it, because they have been looking into it here recently, and they've had decided that the state attorney's office has already looked it over and taken care of it. But
we're talking about news on the front of Douglas Anderson, another investigation, a more recent investigation into how complaints were handled about sexual abuse of students at that school. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can reach us at 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Noah, this is a troubling story for a school that has really a stellar reputation in the arts. They have always been one of the most prestigious magnet schools in St. Johns County. Is there concern that fact, that its reputation and the role that it plays in helping the district, bring aboard students, bolster its reputation, in any way factored into this sort of delay, this inability to begin a proper investigation to actually scrutinize how these complaints were being handled?
I know that is certainly a concern I've heard from folks in the community, but I mean, as far as St. John's, none of this happens in a vacuum. I in particular, if I may, Megan, I wanted to ask, is Scott Schneider still with the DCPS district or no?
That's a great question. We should mention that. So he was until July 1st. The district did not renew his contract.
Got it.
And I know that he had also applied to be superintendent in St. John's last year.
Exactly.
And so, but no, now he's no longer employed by the district, but at the time he was. And so when the district is looking to see what his role was in this, I think a lot of that came from the fact that he was still employed and he was in an even higher leadership position by that point.
He was chief of schools
Right.
when he was applying to be superintendent of St. John's County schools. And at the time, still had that job despite all of this, which they now say was, I mean, he has been, according to the report, he committed a misdemeanor of the first degree. That's what the report says, by failing to report and by preventing the principal from reporting authority figures that engaged in sexual conduct, romantic relationships, or lewd conduct with students. Now, he has called that report inaccurate and defamatory.
And this is why I asked Megan that, is because, I think the St. John's School District would definitely like to think, St. John's as a whole would like to think that what happens in Jacksonville does not necessarily impact St. John's, but Northeast Florida is all connected. And so when Schneider was in the running to be the new superintendent in St. John's, I mean, he was one of the finalists. I was working with Megan a lot and talking with her about, what is public, what has publicly been released, what documents can we verify are available, because this was all sort of tied up in he is maybe attempting to leave Duval at a time when this investigation could have been ongoing and all of this. And that was definitely kind of a tricky part. It was not a part of my own reporting that I necessarily expected to intersect with Megan's, but these are all connected. These school districts are all connected. We're all part of one big Northeast Florida.
Frank, I want to ask you, because the impact on students is really immeasurable, and we know that they have individually been bringing lawsuits against the school district, mostly successful. There have been many. And so this isn't just an issue of the trauma that these students have gone through. It really is a taxpayer issue, because there's going to be millions of dollars ultimately expended in payouts to students who suffered abuse at the hands of their teachers because those allegations were not investigated.
And this is only helping the discovery material that has to be dispersed by defendants in these litigations. And there will be more, as you pointed out. Remember, after the Clayton thing broke, the district commissioned an independent study by a South Florida law firm. That was the 4-page report that Megan mentioned. All they did was interview 20 staffers. Initially, when they had that presentation before the school board, they said they had a list of 140 current or former DA students that they wanted to interview. And that apparently is where we're going now. Reportedly, there's a grand jury that's looking into that. So there could be lots more criminal charges. It depends on what the allegations are and what the statute of limitations is as it affects those charges. But there's more to come.
How is it that this firm that's hired from out of county to do an investigation and a deep dive into what went wrong at DA doesn't turn up this email and the failure to act?
Fantastic question. I mean, I don't have a good answer for you there.
They listed some failures. They found lots of failures. I'm trying to look at my notes here. They said the district needed better training and clarity to conduct investigations and apply discipline where needed. They said the Office of Professional Standards, who you mentioned Mr. Schneider went to directly, was understaffed chronically. There was a lack of training on human services, and not a single staffer that they interviewed had a professional certification, and inadequate technology and use of technology. It was all paper spreadsheets that they were looking into the backgrounds of these people who were facing allegations.
Now, fortunately, about a year ago, they did upgrade to a digital system, and it's very nice that they have a digital system now, but that was the year 2025.
I'd really like to point out, too, I mean, Frank, both of you guys have mentioned it now, that the resulting report was only 4 pages long. And, Megan, this was your story. This was not mine. But when somebody in the newsroom is working on something this large and for so long, you hear about it a lot. It comes up a lot in the newsroom. And so, you had told all of us that this investigation was ongoing, that this report was going to come out. And given everything that you had heard and you had shared with the newsroom, we were all expecting this blockbuster, enormous dossier worth of an investigation. And then for you to come in with a folder that has 4 pieces of paper in it, we were all kind of, dumbfounded that was it.
Where are the attachments?
Right. Exactly. It was really surprising.
John Daigle, this is an issue that has been a problem for the school, clearly, and they have, I think, worked mightily to try to clear their reputation and move on beyond that. But it did also inspire some legislation. And the lawmaker from this area, Wyman Duggan, who may well be a mayoral candidate at some point, the Republican, says that the state attorney went to him directly and said, based on this, we need to do something to toughen up the mandatory reporting statute.
Yeah, and that's, to me, my interest. The state of Florida has a long and interesting history going back on issues of child abuse and this kind of stuff, and new laws. And Daniel is one of our clients at Daigle Creative, and so we've done a lot of work with.
Remind us what Daniel is, so people
Daniel
don't think it's just
a
the name of
local
someone.
nonprofit that deals a lot with children who are abused and taken out of the home. And the issue of family reunification has gone back and forth in Florida over years. I mean, it seems like every few years a bunch of stuff comes out in the press about some child abuse stuff, and the state really, right now the state is in a swing where they're really pushing family unification, not taking kids out of abusive homes and so forth. And the impact, of course, is we have a severe shortage right now in foster homes, and they've really tightened up restrictions on foster homes and made it very difficult to become foster parents. And that cycle has gone back and forth. And the issue of mandatory reporting is a huge part of it. But there are implications on both sides when the, certainly there are really strict, as Megan's reporting is shown, there are really strict laws that affect all of us, really, when it comes to knowing about child abuse and things going on. Laws that say you have to report. But the state really has not been consistent. It just depends on kind of which way the wind is blowing as to whether they prioritize keeping kids in homes that may or may not be abusive, or pulling kids out and putting them into foster care.
I mean, there are enormous consequences to a report of child abuse, but it's interesting to think about, Frank, because we're talking about mandatory reporting here in the context of educators. There's a whole class of professionals that must report using their name, using a certain set of standards for reporting. But in the state of Florida, every adult is a mandatory reporter if they witness abuse or neglect. That means you and me, if we see something we believe is a credible instance, or just possibly, we're required to report it to the abuse hotline and face the same penalties as anyone.
The infuriating irony of all these cases where they get ignored is, I'm going to go to something that used to happen with alarming frequency. Now it's greatly reduced, thank God, and that's guns in schools. And what did the students are told day in, day out? See something, say something. And invariably, when a kid was caught with a gun in school, it was because somebody saw the gun and told the school resource officer or a principal. Great. But they couldn't follow their own advice. We just saw it happen at the Baldwin Middle Senior High School, where everybody knew there was this teacher who was doing ungainly things, and including the principal. So first they arrest the teacher, and now they've arrested the principal for failing to report child abuse.
Yeah, and that is an interesting case because, Megan, I'm going to ask you just about that. We were showing some pictures of mugshots there. We should say the gentleman on the left, Michael Townsend, is the social studies teacher. Excuse me.
No, he's the principal.
The man on the left is the social studies teacher, James Mulvey, who had been accused of having a relationship with a student. And then on the right, Michael Townsend, who is the principal, who was arrested for allegedly failure to report. But this principal, well, perhaps I shouldn't. I don't know if this is a topic that you want to get into or not. Should I skip you?
Well, I've recused myself from this topic because I know somebody involved. But
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I'm going to shift this to you, Noah. Essentially, they have accused the principal of allowing, excusing the behavior, saying that this was something that he had talked to the girl's parent about. She was aware. She didn't have a problem with the fact that the teacher was holding hands with her daughter in the classroom, and then apparently warned the teacher that this investigation was coming and that he, should be aware that it was coming down the pipe.
Yeah, that is extremely serious. I mean, I know you were saying to Frank that all of us, by virtue of just being here in Florida, are mandatory reporters for a lot of things. But I know I can speak from experience. When I was in college, I was a TA for a 1 credit hour little teeny tiny class. And even something as small as that, we all had we had the Riot Act read to us in terms of, you are a mandatory reporter for XYZ. If you fail to report something in this educational setting and we later find out that you were aware of it, you are liable for this. Like in these education settings, that is an extremely serious situation. And I mean, I'm just talking about being a mandatory reporter, then going on to maybe warn somebody ahead of an investigation coming is an even more serious claim. But you're right. When things get to a situation like this where there are children involved in this education space, it gets very, very serious.
The main thing that this new law does, it changes when the clock starts on the statute of limitations. It's not now, if it's 3 years after the actual incident, it's 3 years after if there's a failure to report.
Mm-hmm.
When law enforcement learns about a failure to report.
Right. And it has to be a third-party law agency, too. So Duggan tells me that, like, for instance, the Duval Schools Police wouldn't count as reporting for abuse within Duval Schools because they are
part of the system.
institution. Right?
Gotcha. I want to take a quick call from Mike in Neptune Beach. Mike, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was curious about, I'm listening to your program, it's really good. The Schneider person who was a regional guy, and you said that he, at some point, had said he reported it to an ethics group within the school system and was told that there was a JSO investigation, which subsequently there apparently wasn't. So I'm curious about when the timeline, you were doing timelines, what's the timeline of him reporting it after getting an email?
It's a good question. Yeah, Mike, my belief, Megan, is that he says he reported it to the Office of Professional Standards. That's a school district office that investigates these kind of things within the kind of the month or so.
He told me that he took it right there, that it's like instead of replying to the email chain that was going on, that he walked it over and talked in person there.
And so he says that he did that verbally. And Mike, I'll just ask you, I mean, I think that he did not memorialize it in any way, but he does say that he did it verbally. Do you have a further question?
No, I guess it sounds like he's getting a lot of the brunt or bearing a lot of the brunt for responsibility here. And I was just curious what his responsibilities were subsequent to reporting it to the ethics group. And then if the ethics group said there's a JSO investigation and then there's no JSO investigation, again, where is his culpability and what's his responsibility beyond that?
Yeah.
I'm just curious about it.
Yeah. And so one other element of that is that when the principal asked him, do I need to go to JSO? Do I need to report this to DCF, the Department of Children and Families? He says, you've done what you needed to do. And so she's also a mandatory reporter.
Right.
His advice at that point would be contrary to the law, which is, no, you have to report it. You know about it. You've been given this email. You can't just tell it to me. You have to go to the officials.
Right. So I'm sure that this is a question that will be hashed out as the investigation of this continues. But yes, that's my understanding of it as well, is that the mandatory reporter should make the report. But then I think that they're kind of touching on a gray area. There's a rule that if it has in fact already been reported, you don't have to report it every time you see it and talk about it again for the next however long if you know that there's already an investigation happening. But in this case, there wasn't, and so it will be interesting to see as the details continue to unfold where it fell through the cracks.
We know that DA has the whole district has tightened up on reporting, on training. So
yes, very much so.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. We did not get to European Street. We'll have to talk about that another time.
5-star restaurant.
John Daigle, Noah Hertz, Megan Malakote, Frank Powers. Thank you all so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks,
Ann.
Thanks. Up next, bridging the gaps between jazz and folk, we sit down with singer-songwriter Vance Gilbert ahead of his 2 First Coast performances.
Congaree and Penn, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpenn.com. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
On the next Florida Roundup, the AI election. Artificial intelligence is both a campaign issue and driving campaigns themselves in the Sunshine State. Candidates have used AI-generated images and videos to make their pitch to voters and attack each other. At the same time, data centers that help power AI have become increasingly controversial. So how is AI shaping your vote? Email us radio@thefloridaroundup.org. I'm Tom Hudson. Then join us Friday noon until 1.
On the next Fresh Air, we remember music theater historian Robert Kimball, hear excerpts of our interviews, and listen to music he wrote about. He was the artistic advisor to the Cole Porter and Ira Gershwin estates and wrote biographies of Porter, the Gershwins, and Cecil and Blake. Kimball died last week at age 86. Join us.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
A shakeup in the Maine Senate race as Graham Plattner drops out and leaves a big question mark for Democrats. On the next Friday News Roundup, what a replacement choice will mean for Americans come November. Plus, President Trump doubles down on his deeply unpopular war. We have the latest on all of it and much more next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, my next guest has spent decades creating his own musical fusion of jazz, folk, and R&B, all mixed with a decidedly lighthearted approach to musical performance. He's here to talk about it ahead of his upcoming shows in Fernandina Beach and Jacksonville. Singer-songwriter Vance Gilbert. Vance, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is going to be so much fun.
I'm delighted to have you, and I'm glad that you brought your guitar with you. We are going to play a little bit of your music in a minute, but you have been a practicing musician for more than 3 decades now. But you got a really big career boost in the early 90s when you were called upon to tour with Sean Colvin, who at the time had one of the biggest songs. It was like in the top 10 for a long, long time, won a couple of Grammys for her song. And so you were kind of opening for her. How did that change or did it change?
Well, it did. When I first heard and saw Sean Colvin, I wanted to be like a 5'3" white woman. That was my goal in life.
How did you do?
I got as close as I could musically, and not even that really. I always looked at Sean as like the consummate performer. She had all the things down: the guitar, the vocals, the patter in between. The writing was tremendous, and I had already been doing some of this, and I said, one day I'm going to open for her. And a year and a half later, I was on the road opening for Sean Colvin. So it was a dream come true. And I mean, people say, how do you line up with that? It was disparately different in musical approaches and such, but still that the core things of being that consummate was something that I really strive to be. So that's where I took from her school.
Some of the core elements of your music, because you started sort of with your feet in jazz, but you did move to incorporate all kinds of other influences, and you're now thought of more of like kind of a folk musician. So what are some of the commonalities that have remained?
Well, I'm glad we can work backwards from that. I mean, the folk musician part comes from the fact that I'm solo with a guitar, because that's the most facile way to go out and tour and make money and such. But I still do consider myself a folk musician, but I've listened to and played a lot of jazz when I was going through stages doing sort of house cocktail music and the Great American Songbook, as they call it. And so it's been a mixed bag from everything from jazz and pop to English ballads like "This tune was composed by Spencer the Rover, as valiant a man has ever left home, and he'd been much reduced and caused great confusion." And that's always a pretty wild thing to hear a black man get up in front of an audience and, that's a song from England. What's going on here?
Well, I think you have opened for artists like Anita Baker and Arlo Guthrie. And so I think the people that admire you and put you into their lineup, so to speak, recognize the breadth of your appeal as
Yeah,
well.
there is ADD as the rest.
ADD.
That's what. No, I think that you nailed it. I'm hoping that people recognize the width and breadth of what I've been trying to do all these years.
You almost have to get into folk music to have a sense of humor on stage, though, right? I mean, I feel like there's not a lot of art forms that so much incorporate. And you opened for George Carlin for hundreds of shows.
Yeah.
So you also carry with you that kind of, either you're a good comic or you're a good liar. If you're a folk musician, you've kind of got the storytelling bent.
All of it. I can't believe you said good liar, because that is.
Well, I stole that from Todd Snyder. That's not a name.
Todd is a monster. He's great. He's such good people too.
R.I.P.
But he's yeah, exactly. But that he recognized also the brilliance that comes with owning a stage, and that was something he did. He was brilliant at it, and something I strive to do. And that requires that you put on a show, and that show with a lowercase s with an accent grave on it, you know. You have to be able to put on a show to maintain people's attention, to maintain your own attention, you know.
Vince, I wanted to listen to a little bit of your music, but before we get to it, I don't know if we're going to run out of time or not. So we may come back to talk to you, but he is performing Vance Gilbert at Amelia Island Story and Song Center for Arts and Culture. That's today, 5 to 7. He also has a show in Jacksonville at the Back Room at Ronan School of Music. That's Saturday at 7:30. We've got a link on our website for ticket info. Let's take a little listen to this song of yours. It is called Zombie Patty Cake.
Oh, gracious me.
Whenever we try to dance with your boundaries.
All right. Well, Vance Gilbert, we are thrilled to have you here. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much for taking the time with me. Come on out to the shows tonight, folks, and continue to support this radio station when they come back into you.
And live music.
Yes, please.
All
Both
right.
of those things.
Vance Gilbert, thanks for being here, and thank you for listening to our program. We appreciate it. If you have comments or suggestions, we welcome them. You can send them to First Coast Connect at wjct.org. You can also sign up for our new FCC newsletter at firstcoastconnect.org. First Coast Connect is produced by Stacey Bennett. Our associate producer is Isabella Caspow. Our show is directed by Brady Corum, and our theme music is performed by Club de Belugas. Join us Monday when we sit down with St. Augustine's mayor-elect, St. Augustine's first Black mayor. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com.